Welcome to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corumbus. Our guest today is U.S. Army veteran Andrew Coughlan. Andrew, thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Let's begin with the beginning of your story. Where were you born and raised?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in a small tourist town in West Michigan. It's called Ludington, Michigan. Grew up there until I left for the Army when I was 18.
Shores of Lake Michigan.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful.
Absolutely great place. Is there a history of military service in your family?
So I had a couple uncles that served, and my grandfather served in the Coast Guard. He did 35 years in the Coast Guard. Pretty incredible career he had. Got out as a Chief Warrant Officer 5, which the Coast Guard doesn't even have anymore. So that's pretty cool. And then my brother enlisted into the Air Force right before I did.
Now, you were motivated by 9/11.
Correct.
To serve. Explain how.
Yeah, so I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened, and I remember the day. I remember exactly where I was. I was actually in an intro to criminal justice class. I wanted to be a police officer. 9/11 happened, and like most Americans, they just kind of just changed, our outlook and then especially in high school, a lot of us in my graduating class, a lot of us enlisted into the military right away, and I was just, I just wanted to go serve my country. And I've always had an interest in the military prior to 9/11, but 9/11 was definitely, the deciding factor for me.
So after graduation, you signed up?
Correct. Yeah. So I actually went down to the recruiter a couple weeks after 9/11 and kind of went through the process and just had to wait my turn to go to basic training.
Why'd you pick the Army?
I wanted to be an infantryman, and so how the recruiting station was set up, all the branches had their own. Everybody had their office right there, and the Army's door was open. All the other ones were closed. So I walked into the Army, and it was Staff Sergeant Jeffrey Ward was my recruiter, and the rest kind of history from there.
You're the only one with your door open. That's usually a little bit of an advantage.
Yep.
So where did you do your training?
So I went to basic training at Fort Benning, and then I stayed there for infantry training as well, and then was stationed up at Fort Drum, New York.
And which unit? Is that 10th Mountain Division?
10th Mountain Division, yep. Yeah, it was Bravo Company 132.
And how long were you there before you deployed?
A few months. I want to say I reported, it was right around April 1st. I remember that because I thought it was a joke that there was still, 10 feet of snow on the ground. So I graduated basic training in like February, March, reported, I went home for a couple weeks, then reported right to Fort Drum, and then left for Iraq September 11th, 2003.
2 years to the day after 9/11, and about 6 months after the war in Iraq started. So where was your unit in Iraq?
So we went as a single battalion, so we were kind of really unsure, even when we got to Kuwait. Really unsure where we were going. We knew that we were going to be attached to the 82nd Airborne Division, but really weren't sure where we were going. As a smaller unit, I guess, even though the battalion's very large, we moved around a lot. So one company was in Fallujah for a while, and then we kind of rotated in and out of Fallujah. Some of us were down south a little bit, and Musaib and Habaniya, and just kind of really moved around. But Fallujah and then a little south of Baghdad was kind of our main focuses. And
what were you doing there?
It was interesting because for the first month or so, it was very slow. It was just kind of presence patrols, really, just trying to meet some of the local people, and then the ambushes and the IEDs started. And that was October 2003 time frame. So our mission kind of started changing a little bit too. When the insurgency started kicking up. So it wasn't so much, we'd still do presence patrols, but we also had to go after the insurgents.
You were obviously well trained, and you mentioned that the insurgents were ramping up their attacks aimed at you. When did you first engage with the enemy, and how did it compare to what you expected?
Yeah, so See, it was October 6th, I believe was the date, maybe the night of the 5th. Our unit came under, we were ambushed, roadside bomb, RPGs, and small arms. Two of the guys out of my company were killed, Lieutenant Torres and Private Scott, and then also our Iraqi interpreter was killed, and then the other guys in the truck were severely wounded. That was our first real engagement with the enemy. So 3-4 weeks being in country. And I was 19 years old, and the majority of my platoon was average age of the platoon was probably 22, 23 years old. So we're all kids. None of us really experienced anything like that prior. So that was the first true engagement that we had.
What were your thoughts during it?
Oh man, there was I was scared. I'm not gonna lie. There was some guilt. Some what the heck is this? So like just the emotions and, but also at the same time you really didn't have time to process it. So you just had to put on your boots the next day and go back out there. And this was also the time frame when the Iraqi government started getting rid of some of the Saddam money and stuff like that. So I remember being in banks, just kind of doing security for these banks, because they were afraid that people were going to come in and rob and steal and things like that. But just the anxiety level and your security. You always had to be on alert for sure, but it was a little heightened after those first attacks. Really kept you on your toes.
Describe the mindset. You talk about all the IEDs, and obviously many people were aware of that in the headlines. So when you're going out, whether it's patrols or some other purpose, how on edge are you? And are you looking for things on the side of the road or disturbed dirt? I know.
Yeah, you're always using your training, looking for the disturbed dirt or, just maybe a weird rock pile that, like, why is that there? Things like that. But the enemy's smart. They some of their tactics that they used. A lot of times you're going down the road at 60 miles an hour. And while you have the gunner and you have, I drove probably 99% of the missions. I drove a lot for our lieutenant, so I was always one of the first vehicles in the convoy. My focus was obviously driving, make sure I wasn't crashing into anything, but you also had to scan the side of the road. And the thing about IEDs and roadside bombs is, if you roll over them, you're not going to know until it blows up. Which not all the routes you go over, not all of them have already been cleared by EOD or an engineer company or anything like that. So sometimes you might be rolling over fresh IEDs. Now at the same time, one of the things that I've always thought about is how many IEDs that I roll over or roll past that I have no idea about. So that's something 15, 16 years later that I still think about.
2003 and then into 2004. At what point there are you seeing the sectarian rivalries kind of bubble up?
Yeah, where I spent a lot of my deployment, it was in Musaib, which, just 30 miles south of Baghdad, about I believe, and it was kind of that that area that they're like the Sunni and Shiites. Like if an all-out civil war was going to happen, I always felt like it was going to happen right there, because it was just kind of the dividing point of the country. And I think spring of '04, the attacks were a little more frequent, and they were even a little more sophisticated or different. I remember one convoy they actually had a piano wire strung across the road, and the whole idea was to nail that first gunner, take off his head. And I remember that. So as I mentioned, I drove a lot, but on this mission I was actually the gunner in the second truck. And our SOP was the gunner always sat. There's a swinging strap, I guess, in the turret of the Humvee, and we always sat down. And thank goodness for that, because just kind of lowered the gunner. But when we're going through that convoy, or going through that route, that piano wire actually pulled up the 50 cal machine gun barrel, lifted it up, and there was an accidental discharge from the barrel that shot back through the convoy. And at first, you had no idea what the heck it was. You didn't know if we were being shot at, if it was a grenade, it was an unexpected thing. That's kind of, after we stopped and learned about what was going on. It's kind of where we learned what the attack was.
Andrew, we're going to pause right there. We're going to pick up your story right after the break here on Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today by U.S. Army veteran Andrew Coughlan. He's a veteran of the Iraq War. And Andrew, you were just telling us about the threats alongside the road, the IEDs, piano wire, and that sort of thing. But July 19th, 2004 is the day that I'm sure is seared into your mind. Explain where you were and what happened.
Yeah, so July 19th, 2004, it's a day that'll live with me forever. We're at FOB Chosen, FOB Chosen, right along the Euphrates River. We're the first U.S. military unit there and kind of established this FOB, and we're 9-10 months into the deployment, and up to this point, we've been mortared and rocket attacks and IEDs, out on the road, and we had our fair share of combat. But this day, it was right before lunchtime. My platoon, we were getting ready to go out on a mission later that day. It was middle of the day mission, so presence patrol through the villages, and our leadership was going to be meeting with the local leadership, and so a lot of us in the platoon were prepping our gear, making sure that doing all your checks on your weapons and your ammunition, make sure the trucks had gas, all that stuff that we've done hundreds of times prior to this. And I remember sitting on my cot and heard the first mortar go over, and everybody just kind of looked at each other like, yeah, it's going overhead, no big deal. Second one sounded a little bit closer, so guys kind of perked up a little bit. Third one, we all just kind of looked at each other and was like, all right, we need to get to the bunkers. And then after that third one, it went just so fast. I mean, the insurgents were just dialed in on us. At that point, myself and my two teammates out of my fire team, Charles Persing and Adam Baus, the three of us left the tent that we lived in, and myself and Adam, we had no protective gear on. Our gear was already loaded on the truck, and Persing, he had his vest and stuff on. He wasn't going on the mission that day. And as soon as we stepped out of the tent, turned right, started running up towards the trucks, mortar hit in between us and where we were going, and there was a couple small bunkers, cement bunkers. If you kind of think of like a upside down U-shaped concrete bunker, it's really all it was, open on both ends. And the three of us got into one of those bunkers, and seemed like it took forever, but I'm sure it was seconds. One of the mortars hit right next to the bunker, and then the next one actually hit at the opening of the bunker. And right before that, I remember looking at Charles. So Charles was at one opening, I was in the middle, and then Adam was at the other end, at the other opening. And I remember looking at Charles, and he just told me to hang on to him. And the next round came, hit the opening of the bunker, and Charles shielded me from the blast. And that's something that I always think about, is the last decision that Charles ever made of his life was to save mine. Charles was killed instantly. Adam and I are covered in blood, and we kind of checked each other out, make sure that we weren't hit. I remember bringing Charles back into the bunker, and and at this time it's kind of foggy, but I remember other guys in our company and in our platoon kind of coming out of the tents, and so there were guys trying to help Charles and do what they could. And then I remember looking up, and now our tents are on fire. The tents that we just left took a direct hit, and it started a fire. So now we have incoming mortars. Our tents are on fire. Inside our tents, all of our ammunition. So now our ammunition's cooking off. Myself and Adam left the bunker numerous times to bring the wounded back into the bunker and start first aid on them. But I remember Sergeant Ramirez. He was the other team leader in my squad. He was the Bravo team leader. And I remember looking up and see him walk out of the tent, and then he just collapsed. And he had blood coming down his face. And I left the bunker, and I don't know who the other person was, but myself and somebody else picked Sergeant Ramirez up and brought him into the bunker. Left the bunker probably the fourth or fifth time at this point. Everybody was now out of the tents, and the tents are completely gone, but mortars and rockets are still coming in. There's still secondary explosions going off, and I remember loading the guys up, carrying them up to the trucks. And the trucks, each platoon, had maybe 6 or 7 trucks, and I don't know if I had that many. But a lot of the trucks had damage. Mortars went, blown out tires, blown out windshields. I'm sure there was engines and stuff that were destroyed. So finding trucks that were actually functionable to get these guys to the medevac, that was another added challenge. And I remember, just kind of seeing some of the guys, some of the wounded. They took pieces of shrapnel, but they were, they were mobile and able to get to the trucks, with little assistance. And but then I remember seeing Sergeant Lloyd, who was my team leader, and I remember loading Sergeant Lloyd into the back of the Humvee, and just as he was lifeless, but so that day, Persing and Sergeant Lloyd, 2 guys out of my fire team, were both killed, and Sergeant Adams, my squad leader, was severely wounded. James O'Leary, another guy in my squad, was severely wounded. Sergeant Ramirez was severely wounded. And then there were some other guys, in the company, that were wounded as well. But, our squad, 9 guys, pretty close. We've spent the last 10 months of our life together. Every waking moment, slept next to each other. We're there together. And then within seconds, minutes after the squad's gone. Physically, I wasn't wounded. I didn't take a piece of shrapnel. I wasn't burned. I wasn't nothing. But I was covered in blood. And that's something, that haunts me, really. Just the feelings that came after that, the hopelessness and the what the heck just happened. Because before this, I'll back up a little bit. I remember our company first sergeant. He actually thought that I was wounded, and he was trying to instruct me to get on the medevac. And I was a little confused why he was telling me that, and but I was covered in so much blood that he thought it was mine. I had to wear those same clothes for a couple days because all my stuff burned. We didn't have any resupply or anything like that, but then I remember going back down, and and we kind of moved, obviously, to a different part of the camp that we're at. Moved into a hard building, and I remember going down to our tents where, and Sergeant Ramirez, he must have did laundry that morning or something, because they had clothes out on the clothesline. They were still there. I mean, they were riddled with holes, shrapnel holes, but I actually wore his uniform. Obviously, took his rank and took his name off. But I wore Sergeant Ramirez's uniform for the next couple days until I could get my own. It was in 2004, and it's something that's just so. It's like it happened yesterday. I mean, those memories are still fresh.
Hard to even imagine. When did you or someone else suspect that you were dealing with post-traumatic stress?
So I actually had my first nightmare in Iraq. It was a couple days after that mortar attack. I didn't sleep for about 48, 72 hours, something like that. And I remember asking my platoon sergeant if I could talk to the chaplain. The chaplain and leadership sent me up to the aid station. The medics, they did a good job taking care of me for the night. And, I had a nightmare that night though, but the next morning when they asked me how I slept, I pretty much lied to them. Slept fine. I just wanted to get back with the rest of the guys, and so that was the first nightmare I had. But I knew I still had 2 months left in country, and I get back, ironically, September 11th, 2004 is when I got back to Fort Drum, and I didn't tell really anybody that I was coming home. I didn't have any family, back waiting for me, and didn't tell my mom I was coming home, nothing. Well, she was my friend at the time. She's now my wife, but Ashley came to visit me. We spent the weekend together and got married a couple weeks later. So about a month after I came home from Iraq, we got married. And it was like Thanksgiving time of 2004 when I kind of lost it. Started to lose it, I should say. But I just remember driving and just had snot bubbles coming out of my nose, and I was crying and shaking, and nothing happened. There wasn't an event, or she didn't say anything, or I didn't see anything, but I just kind of those thoughts were going through my head. She just kind of looked at me like, what the heck's going on? Because I really never shared with her what happened, and then kind of over time, over the next couple weeks, Sergeant Adams, my squad leader, and I think he might have been the first one that told me to go get help. I was just talking about this not that long ago, but I remember Sergeant Adams kneeling down in front of me in a hallway. I was breaking down, and he's the one that encouraged me, and if I remember correctly, he actually drove me to the behavioral health clinic there on post at Fort Drum. And then in 2000, it was probably spring of 2005. That's when I was diagnosed with PTSD. And the Army found me unfit for duty. So now I'm 21 years old, and the Army pretty much said, thank you for your service, can't be an infantry anymore, gotta go home. So 2 days after my 22nd birthday, I was medically discharged from the Army for PTSD.
Well, what happened then?
Ashley and I moved back to Michigan. Her and I went to high school together. Moved back to Michigan, and we moved back in January, early February. I started a job. Things were, kind of going as I would expect. I got a job right after the military and whatever. And then in June of 2006, I remember Ashley, she came home. She was visiting her mom, and she came home late. She kneeled down in front of me and told me that my friend Russell was killed in Afghanistan. And I think when she told me Russell was killed in Afghanistan, that's what really hurt. I was dealing with PTSD. Really didn't understand it well. But the guilt that I had from Iraq, from surviving and not being physically wounded, to Russell being killed, and here I am sitting back in Michigan. So a lot of that guilt came back, a lot of the anger, and so I quit my job. Short time after that, I was in a psych ward. Couldn't hold a job. Ashley and I were having marriage issues. I was on 14 or 15 different medications at one point. I gained a bunch of weight. I was dealing with depression, failed out of school, had some suicidal thoughts. I wasn't functioning. Wasn't the person that I knew I should be, that I knew I wanted to be. So it's my transition home in those first couple of years. It was rough. I pushed a lot of people away. Sure, I hurt people along the way. It was rough. Ashley and I ended up getting a divorce. We went through a divorce, and at the time our baby was, Maddie was probably 3 months old. Still didn't have a job. Still, I was just kind of going through the motions of life. I moved away, a couple hours away, so I could be closer to the VA. Spent a lot of time in the VA, whether it's the psych ward or PTSD inpatient programs, outpatient, just trying anything and everything. Battled substance abuse for a little bit, and it wasn't fun.
What ultimately helped you the most?
It's a tough question. I moved down to Florida from Michigan, pretty much not knowing a single soul. Was still kind of lost in my transition. I knew that there were people there that wanted to help. I knew that I had people in my life that wanted to help. And I've met a lot of great people in the last 10 years or so that have really they saw things in me that maybe I never saw, and have always stood by me. So, but to answer your question about what helped the most, I don't know if there's one specific thing that I could say, but there's a number of things that have helped. The peer-to-peer networking, being around other veterans, and not just other veterans. For me, being around other combat veterans, it has been huge. Being an advocate as well. It's kind of the way I kind of look at it. It's wearing a different uniform, but with the same purpose of helping veterans. In some cases, I've ended up mentoring, a handful of those veterans. Volunteering, it has been another huge thing for me. I volunteer with a number of organizations, community organizations, and they're not all veteran organizations either, which I think that's been important. Kind of getting away from the whole veteran and military aspect of things has helped. Physical exercise has been a huge part of my life, especially the last year and a half. A few years ago, I completed a marathon. Kind of thought, well, I don't have to challenge myself physically anymore, but I kind of fell back into a little bit of a depression. I wasn't physically feeling well, and the last year and a half, I've I got back into being physically active. So I think a combination of all those things. And then one of the things that I haven't mentioned is Ashley and I ended up getting remarried. And she's been a saint. I mean, just the support that she has given me, and knowing how important the things that I do now, how important they are to me, and her always being there supporting me. It's been huge.
How did you meet President Bush?
Oh man, so that was a pretty cool experience. So President Bush has his military service initiative. The one thing about President Bush is, he's dedicated his post-presidency to make sure that the veterans are still taken care of, and he's done this through a couple different ways. But how I met President Bush was I was invited to come out to his ranch in Texas, and along with a handful of other veterans, and go mountain biking with him. When I got there, so I was the only lower enlisted veteran there, which I noticed real quick. A lot of sergeant majors, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, officers, all guys that, as a young E4, these are all men and women that I looked up to. So that was cool to be surrounded by them. But I was selected to come ride mountain bikes with them. I'm not an experienced mountain biker like some of these other guys were, and but yeah, so I got to go out to his ranch for 3 or 4 days and ride bikes with them and crack jokes with them. And he's just, I always kind of think of him as like my favorite uncle. He's a real humble leader. And one of the cool things too is there were many times where there were no cameras around. And I think that says a lot about him. We're having dinner in his house, and he's the same person as when we're out on the trail, or when he's giving an interview. So very genuine. Same thing with Mrs. Bush.
Well, your life of service, and I wish we had time to get into this a little bit, because you saved the life of a fellow veteran by donating a kidney. You've been a bone marrow transplant donor twice, and it's an incredible journey. And I know it's been a difficult one, and I know it's not easy to tell it, but I thank you very much for doing so today and for all you've done for our country.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Andrew Coughlan is a veteran of the U.S. Army specialist. He served the United States in the Iraq War, and he's been our guest today on Veterans Chronicles.